We can see businesses having to pay higher national insurance contributions, estates, inheritance tax thresholds not keeping up with the rate of inflation until 2030. So you can see basically people working hard, people are the ones that are going to be impacted up and down this country. The budget has been announced. Labour have delivered their first budget in 14 years. Now in this video, we're going to run through how it will impact landlords, developers, business owners, and what strategies you can actually look at going forward. Now, if you're new to the channel, my name is Malki Purwal, one half of Savoys Properties. We've been in the property industry for 23 years, specializing in commercial, residential, and the occasional new build projects. And we've been running the Savoys Property brand for the past 4 years and run educational events, as well as development and management services. Now, the budget's been announced. Now let's run through the main points which we think impacts businesses and property people across the UK. Now, the first one is the employer's national insurance contribution has been increased by 1.2% to 15% from April 2025. And with the thresholds being decreased from £9,100 to £5,000. What does this mean? Well, effectively, it's a tax on businesses. If you run a business and you're employing people, you're contributing to the economy, helping people with jobs, providing valuable services, you're actually being taxed now. And it's a significant cost to businesses who have been impacted since Brexit and COVID. Now, this is now going to deter people such as ourselves for taking on new staff. We may end up looking at possibly taking on someone part-time or potentially using contractors rather than full-time employed because the cost has gone up. And it's a significant cost to businesses who have numerous employees within the business. Capital gains tax is being impacted with immediate effect. It's basically being increased from 10 to 18% for low rate taxpayers and from 20 to 24% for higher rate taxpayers. Now, this is not necessarily just for property, this is for other assets that you may be selling. This may deter new property stock coming to the market and will deter people potentially purchasing properties as an asset form because when they look to exit, they'll be taxed a lot higher on it. Stamp duty levy tax. Well, basically what stamp duty levy tax is an additional tax to stamp duty for people that own an additional property or purchasing properties in company names. This is now actually being increased from 3 to 5%. What does this mean? Well, this is basically potentially the final nail in the coffin from buy-to-let. Buy-to-let was already at a disadvantage with certain things being scrapped over the years with the wear and tear allowance. This was the 10% amount that you can actually remove from your turnover if you rented a property out furnished. Then you had Section 24, which basically meant if you're a higher rate taxpayer, you can only offset 50% of the mortgage as a deduction, which has deterred a lot of people from buying properties in personal names. So with the increase in the stamp duty levy tax, this potentially is that final nail in the coffin that people were fearing. Business rates for existing 40% of retail, leisure, and hospitality industries will continue until 25-26 tax year at a cap of £110,000 per business. Now, this is a good thing. These industries have been suffering, especially since COVID, and these industries actually needed that support. So this is actually a positive. And for the likes of us that are trying to revive the high street, you need to ensure that you have viable businesses operating within these areas. Now, you only have to visit high streets, malls up and down the country. There's loads of empty units, loads of empty shops up and down the high street. Now, this is for multiple reasons. A lot of businesses were impacted by COVID in 2020 and never reopened the doors again. Then you found a lot of users now have simply gone online. They find the product online, they order it online. Even if they're purchasing clothes, you can purchase your clothes online. If you don't like it, they give you free bags to actually go to the post office and return these items. So it is an area which we believe needs support, and it's nice to actually see the government doing the right thing in providing that support. Inheritance tax, which is basically 40% tax on a deceased person's assets over the £325,000 threshold. Well, this is actually now going to be frozen until 2030. What does this mean? Well, typically you've got inflation that has been 10% to 20%. Is now fallen below 2% at the moment. Well, if this now remains in place for the next 6 years, individuals are actually going to be losing money because their estate will be growing, and with the inheritance tax threshold not keeping up with the current retail price index or inflation, they're actually going to be at a disadvantage. So it's a big negative for anyone owning assets within the UK. Now, when it comes to schools, primary and secondary schools, there's always been a debate about there's not enough quality schools, with a lot of people then resorting to putting their kids in secondary schools. Well, the government's been talking about introducing 20% VAT on private schools, moving their charitable status. Now, they've actually come out and announced this officially now. So from January 2025, this is actually going to come into force. So typically, a lot of the people that put their kids into private schools are actually business owners. They'll need to now recoup this money somewhere, and likelihood is you're going to see prices increase. Now, when you've gone through majority of the changes that have actually come in, we can see businesses having to pay higher national insurance contributions, estates, inheritance tax thresholds not keeping up with the rate of inflation until 2030. So you can see basically people working hard, people are the ones that are going to be impacted up and down this country. We've been discussing a lot of negatives, but where are the opportunities, you may be asking? Well, I think the one clear opportunity is basically commercial to residential conversions. It's something that we've been specializing in, with the increase in stamp duty levy tax being the final nail in the coffin when it comes to buying residential houses. The stamp duty rates for commercial properties were already lower than residential, and it just makes sense now to actually focus on that commercial to residential strategy. If you are looking at residential properties, you probably want to be focusing in some of the more up and coming areas where the price points are a lot lower, or looking in the north where you can actually get a lot of property for very little money. Now, when it comes to commercial to residential, as we mentioned during this video, there's a lot of properties up and down the country that are vacant. These are all primed to be repurposed. What we typically do in these situations is we keep maybe a small retail element, bring it business rates exempt. This is now ideal for the mom and pop startup businesses, the ones that basically start from home and then need to take that next step. And then the rest of that space being the zone B, C, D areas of the shop, basically being repurposed to residential use. You actually then get more per square foot than you would if it remained commercial. And then the uppers, typically with a lot of these defunct banks, tend to be offices. Now, these are quite straightforward to repurpose to residential use via a prior approval application. The whole planning process only actually takes 56 days. You may need to get some reports for transport assessment if you don't have adequate parking, just showing basically it's close to the train station, buses, and maybe you've got some cycle storage, and this will compensate for the lack of car parking spaces. Then you also need to take into consideration whether it's near some MOT garages or some warehouses that may be generating noise, and you may have to find some mitigation strategies around that. But apart from that, it's actually quite straightforward to get that planning permission passed, and that could be a big opportunity also. When it comes down to running businesses, obviously we mentioned that the employer's national insurance contribution is raised by 1.2% to 15%, and the actual threshold where it kicks in has been decreased from £9,100 to £5,000. Now, what we may see here is the increase of possibly part-time workers and also contractors being used by a lot of SME businesses, basically to reduce costs and maintain profitability. So it may be something for you guys to consider yourselves. With capital gains tax obviously being increased for lower rate taxpayers from 10 to 18%, higher rate taxpayers from 20 to 24%, it may be worth working with specialist accountants to see whether you can actually reduce the capital gains element down. We understand you can use things such as capital allowances to potentially reduce this down, but this increase basically encourages you guys to actually work with a specialist accountant to ensure that you're not overpaying when disposing of assets. Now, we've teamed up with Gravita, who's basically a specialist accountancy firm. They have over 4,000 clients, over 400 employees, and operate in 96 countries across the world. They're going to be analyzing the budget, and they're going to be telling you guys what the strategies are, where the constraints are, and what path you guys should be going if you're going to continue to invest in property. Now, details of this will be in the bio. We hope to see you guys there. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, ensure that you hit the bell icon, subscribe, and I hope to see you at the next video.